Microsoft released their earnings today. Let's take a look at Xbox and a little bit more. Yesterday, we got some new figures related to Xbox sales during Q1 from NPD, and they looked pretty darn good. And today, Microsoft is dropping their earnings for what we typically consider Q1 on the calendar year, or Q3 according to Microsoft's fiscal year, about how Xbox has performed. So, overall, Microsoft had a tremendous quarter, $49.4 billion in revenue, so that is total money they brought into the house. And then they had a net income of $16.7 billion. That is just an astronomical number of mini fridge units, or to put it another way, it's 1/4 of an Activision acquisition. So Microsoft they put $16.7 billion into the bank. That is just an incredible growth, and it's continued, we're not quite post-pandemic, but they've continued sustained growth during this weird time that we are in. And so overall, Microsoft is incredibly healthy, and they should be able to pay the bills for yet another quarter. Now, let's dive into the Xbox figures here, and what I'm going to read to you is verbatim from Microsoft's own earnings, and then we'll dive into them just a little bit deeper. So, according to Microsoft, they said Xbox hardware revenue grew 14%, driven by continued demand for the Xbox Series X and S. Xbox content and services revenue increased 4%, driven by growth in Xbox Game Pass subscriptions and first-party titles, offset by a decline in third-party titles. Total gaming revenue was about $3.74 billion, which is roughly up about 6% year over year. And we got a fancy chart to take a look at that. So you can take a look here and you can see Microsoft's gaming revenue has continued to climb pretty consistently. And of course, last quarter being the top dog of everything that is going on. Now, some interesting things to point out from here is about 80% of Microsoft's revenue comes from content and services, which as a reminder is how Microsoft wants to be judged, and about 20% as of this quarter is coming from hardware sales. So just sort of keep all that in mind. Now, it's also important to point out that this is a year-over-year comparable is how Microsoft does all of their earnings. That's an industry standard. But keep in mind, especially on the gaming side, a year ago was a launch cycle. We are now beyond that cycle. We're out of the launch cycle is the best way to describe it. And hardware sales continue to be healthy and strong for Xbox, which is a really good sign for Microsoft. Now, Microsoft does call out that says, hey, we are still constrained by chip shortages and other supply constraints in the industry. We are not immune to that. Although they did not give an actual declaration of what percentage of an impact they are continuing to see. Sometimes companies will do that. Apple has done it in previous quarters. Microsoft did not do it related to Xbox in this particular quarter. So keep in mind, while they do say there are constraints, they aren't really giving us valid percentages that we can run with. The nutshell here is that Xbox had a really healthy quarter. One of the things that I think is worth pointing out too is that they grew 4%, and they said it was driven by first-party titles and Game Pass Game Pass products, and it was offsetting a decline in third-party titles. Now, they do say plural for titles. Typically, Fortnite had been that sort of outlier that was really driving a lot of revenue for Xbox, and that decline really hurt Microsoft in some capacity. Although, now they're saying specifically titles, and I don't know if they're doing that to cover up potentially things like in-game transactions. On the flip side of that, we also know that Call of Duty hasn't been performing exceptionally well, and so it could be a mix and match of Fortnite and Call of Duty or other titles. But either way, it's important to point out that their first-party titles, based on the information that Microsoft has provided today, is performing exceptionally strong. So, what does this all boil down to? It boils down to is that Microsoft's strategy appears to be working. One of the things that we still don't know is what's the net income of Xbox. They've always just reported raw revenue. They don't give us a breakdown of individual financials. But considering that they're doing about $3.5 billion or $3.75 billion, I should say, in a quarter, that's really, really good for Microsoft. I mean, the chart really just kind of highlights how strong of a quarter and how well Xbox continues to grow in the revenue side. We really got to be, I wish Microsoft would break out the figures. They are known to do this. I mean, it's like trying to find Azure revenue is just incredibly difficult inside the world of Microsoft. But either way, Xbox is continuing to grow. Regardless of anything else, we know that Microsoft is making more money. We don't know if it's costing them more money to make that, but as of right now, they are definitely bringing more dollars into the door than they had in any previous year, up until this point relating to what they're doing now. So what's the nutshell? The nutshell is Xbox is pretty healthy. Xbox is doing well. Their strategy appears to be working. The question is, are they profitable? And that's another unknown that we don't quite have all the details, although Phil Spencer has said that Game Pass is sustainable in its current form. We don't really know the nuts and bolts and details, and Microsoft did not provide, at least as of yet, has not provided an update on Game Pass subscribers. So if Microsoft does provide any more additional information, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.